The stars looked the same as they always did, but Captain Jake Morrison knew that looks could lie. He stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the endless dark through the main screen. 200 years had passed since humans first met, other species among the stars, and still the galaxy felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. The Liberty moved through space like a silver knife cutting through black cloth. She was not the biggest ship in the human fleet, but she was fast and tough. Jake had commanded her for 5 years now, and his crew trusted him like family. Navigator Lisa Parker sat at her station, her fingers dancing over the controls as she checked their course. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez was somewhere below in the engine room, probably talking to the machines like they were old friends. Medical Officer Karen Walsh reviewed supply reports while keeping one eye on the crew's health data. The galaxy had rules for everything, especially war. The Korith Accords had been written 3,000 years ago by species that humans had never heard of back then. Every battle had to happen in special zones away from planets and trade routes. Civilians could never be targets. Prisoners had to be treated well. Surrender was always accepted. These rules had kept the peace for longer than human civilization had existed. Jake remembered learning about the Accords in the academy. His instructors had made it clear that breaking these rules meant becoming an outcast in galactic society. No species would trade with you, help you, or even talk to you. The Accords were not just military law, but the foundation of civilized space. The human fleet followed these rules just like everyone else. Earth had fought 3 small wars since joining the Federation, and each time they had played by the ancient rules. Win or lose, honor the Accords, and keep your place at the galactic table. The Liberty was on patrol duty in the Outer Rim, where pirates sometimes tried to raid mining ships and freight haulers. It was quiet work most of the time, which suited Jake fine. He had seen enough fighting during the border conflicts with the Helix Collective 10 years ago. Lisa looked up from her station with a frown. Captain, I am picking up something strange. Multiple signals from the New Haven sector. Jake moved to her station. New Haven was a human mining colony about 6 hours away at full speed. They dug rare metals from the asteroids there and sent them back to Earth. About 3,000 people lived on the main station, mostly families who had wanted to start fresh, far from the crowded inner worlds. What kind of signals? Jake asked. Distress, calls, emergency broadcasts, and something else. Lisa adjusted her controls. Military signatures, big ones. Danny's voice came through the comm system from engineering. Captain, I am reading massive energy spikes in that direction. Looks like ship weapons firing. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Pirates did not use weapons that big. Put it on screen. The main display changed to show the New Haven system. Even from this distance, they could see the flashes of weapon fire like tiny stars being born and dying. Too many flashes for a pirate raid. Those are Vazari ships, Lisa said, her voice quiet. Jake knew about the Vazari Empire. They were warriors who followed the old ways with religious devotion. Honor through battle, victory through strength, and absolute respect for the Korith Accords. If the Vazari were attacking New Haven, it meant they believed they had a legal reason under galactic law. Get me Admiral Stone, Jake ordered. Emergency channel. The comm officer tried for several minutes before shaking his head. No response. Sir, all military frequencies are jammed. How long to reach New Haven at maximum speed? 4 hours and 30 minutes, Lisa replied. Jake stared at the screen. The flashes were getting brighter, which meant the battle was getting worse. New Haven had some defensive weapons, but nothing that could stop a Vazari battle fleet. The colonists would be hiding in their emergency shelters, waiting for help that might not come in time. The smart thing would be to call for backup and wait. The Liberty was just one ship against what looked like a full invasion force. Going in alone would be suicide and would not help the colonists anyway. But Jake thought about the families on New Haven. Mayor Frank Collins and his deputy Helen Brooks had sent him dinner invitations every time the Liberty passed through their system. They had children there, old people, and folks who just wanted to live quiet lives, mining rocks and raising crops in the station's growing areas. Set course for New Haven, Jake said. Maximum speed. His crew looked at him with surprise, but began carrying out the order without question. They trusted him, even when he made choices that seemed impossible. The Liberty turned toward the distant battle, her engines pushing her faster than she had ever gone before. Jake knew they were flying toward almost certain death. But he also knew that sometimes being human meant doing the right thing even when it made no sense at all. The Liberty dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Haven system, and Jake Morrison felt his heart sink. 6 Vazari warships hung in space around the mining colony like metal vultures circling their prey. The station itself showed damage from weapon strikes, its outer ring dark where the power had failed. "Report," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. Lisa Parker worked her controls with quick, nervous movements. "The Vazari fleet is in standard siege formation. They are following the Korith Accords perfectly. No targeting of civilian areas. Only military and infrastructure hits. Any response from the colony? They are broadcasting surrender requests every 10 minutes. The Vazari are not answering." Jake studied the tactical display. General Vekma commanded the Vazari fleet, and Jake knew his reputation. The general was old-school military who treated the Korith Accords like holy text. If he was here, it meant the Vazari Empire believed they had legal grounds for this attack. "Danny, what is our status against those ships?" Jake asked over the "Come, not good, Captain. 6-1 odds, and their ships are newer than ours. We might take out one of them if we get lucky, but they would turn us into space dust pretty quick." The colony's emergency channel crackled to life. "This is Mayor Frank Collins calling any human ships in the area. New Haven is under attack. We have taken heavy damage to life support and power systems. Request immediate assistance." Jake recognized Frank's voice, though it sounded older and more tired than he remembered. He pressed the come button. "Frank, this is Captain Morrison on the Liberty. What is your situation, Jake?" "Thank God you are here." Relief flooded Frank's voice. "The Vazari hit us 6 hours ago. They claim we violated some mining treaty, but we have no idea what they are talking about. Our defensive grid is down, and the life support systems are failing. We have maybe 4 days of air left." Jake closed his eyes. 4 days, and the nearest human fleet was 6 days away. Even if he sent a message right now, help would arrive too late. "How many people do you have there?" 3,040 souls, including 200 children. We moved everyone into the deep shelters. But if life support fails, Frank did not need to finish. Jake understood. Without life support, the shelters would become tombs. "Stand by, Frank. We are working on options." Jake cut the channel and looked at his crew. They all knew the math as well as he did. One ship could not fight 6 and win. Running for help meant abandoning the colonists to a slow death by suffocation. Trying to evacuate 3,000 people with one ship was impossible. "Sir," said Lieutenant Pete Harris from the tactical station, "I am reading Vazari troopships moving toward the colony. Looks like they plan to board after the defenses fail completely." Jake watched the enemy ships position themselves. Everything they did followed proper military doctrine. They were not cruel or unusual in their attack methods. They simply followed the ancient rules of war that said civilians must be protected, but infrastructure could be destroyed to force surrender. The problem was that destroying New Haven's life support systems would kill everyone inside, even if the Vazari never meant to hurt civilians. Sometimes following the rules perfectly still led to disaster. "Captain," Lissa said quietly, "we could try to run past them and evacuate some people. Maybe save a few hundred before they stop us." Jake shook his head. "They would blast us apart before we got close. And saving a few hundred means leaving 3,000 to die." Karen Walsh spoke up from her medical station. "What about negotiating? Maybe we could offer them something they want more than the colony." "Like what?" Pete asked. "We do not have anything they need." Jake stared at the tactical display, his mind racing through impossible options. The Vazari were honor-bound warriors who respected strength and courage. They followed the rules because the rules represented order and civilization. But what if someone offered them something the rules had never considered? "Sir, the Vazari are hailing us," the come officer reported. "Put them through." The main screen changed to show General Vekma, a tall warrior with gray skin and sharp features. His uniform was perfect, his posture straight, and his eyes held the calm confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "Human vessel," Vekma said in accented but clear English. "You are ordered to withdraw from this system immediately. This is a legal military action under Federation law. You have no authority to interfere." "General Dekma," Jake replied, "I am Captain Morrison. What are your terms for the colonists?" "They will be relocated to proper human worlds after surrendering. Their illegal mining operations will cease. All weapons and military equipment will be surrendered. These are standard terms under the Korith Accords, and if their life support fails before they can surrender," the Squemmer-esque expression did not change, "that is an unfortunate result of their resistance. They should have surrendered immediately. Instead of fighting." Jake felt anger rise in his chest. The Vazari general was not evil or cruel, he was just following rules written so long ago that they could not account for situations like this. Rules that said protecting civilians meant not shooting at them directly, but said nothing about what happened when destroying military targets killed them anyway. General, those people are not soldiers, they are families with children. Children, who will die because their leaders chose to resist legal authority, Vecmo replied. The blame for their deaths lies with those who refuse to surrender, not with those who enforce galactic law. The channel closed, leaving Jake staring at a blank screen. He understood now why the Vazari felt justified. Under the letter of the law, they were right, but being legally right did not make 3,000 deaths acceptable. Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. Sometimes the only way to save lives was to break every rule ever written. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Liberty and made a choice that no military academy had ever taught him to make. He turned to his crew and saw their faces filled with the same desperate hope and fear that he felt in his own heart. Lisa, plot a course directly between the Vazari fleet and New Haven colony, he said quietly. Sir, that will put us in their direct line of fire, she replied, but her hands were already moving over the controls. Danny, shut down all weapons systems. I want them powered down completely, not just offline. Captain, are you sure about this? Danny's voice came through the comm with confusion and worry. Karen, prepare the medical bay for possible wounded. Pete, open a channel to all ships in the system, including the Vazari fleet. Jake's crew followed his orders without argument, though he could see the questions in their eyes. They trusted him, even when his commands made no sense from any military perspective they knew. Channel open, sir, Pete reported. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward to the main screen. What he was about to do had never been attempted. In the 3,000-year history of the Korath Accords, no species had ever considered it because no species thought the way humans did. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Liberty, speaking to all vessels in this system. I am making an offer that I hope will save the lives of 3,000 innocent people. On the tactical display, Jake could see the Vazari ships adjusting their positions. They were probably confused by the Liberty's approach, but they had not opened fire yet. General Vecma, you want New Haven colony to surrender according to galactic law. The colonists want to live. I am offering you a compromise that serves both goals. Jake paused, knowing that his next words would change everything. Not just for his crew or the colonists, but for the entire galaxy. I offer myself and my ship as voluntary hostages in exchange for allowing the colonists of New Haven to evacuate safely to human space. This is not a military surrender in battle. This is a personal exchange. One captain's life and freedom for 3,000 civilian lives. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Lisa looked up from her station with wide eyes. Pete's hand had stopped moving over his controls. Even Danny's constant chatter from engineering had ceased. Sir, Pete said carefully, the Korath Accords do not cover this situation. There is no precedent for voluntary hostage exchange outside of active combat. That is exactly why it might work, Jake replied. General Vecma follows the rules perfectly, but what happens when someone offers something the rules never considered? The comm system crackled with an incoming message from the Vazari flagship. General Vespase appeared on screen, and for the first time since the conversation began, his calm expression showed confusion. Human Captain, explain your proposal. This is not standard military procedure. General, you want the colony to submit to Vazari authority, but the colonists will die before they can surrender properly because their life support is failing. My proposal solves this problem. Jake moved closer to the screen. Allow evacuation ships to come and take the colonists to safety. In exchange, I will surrender my ship and crew to your custody voluntarily. You get a human warship and prisoners without having civilian deaths on your record. Vechmer's expression grew even more puzzled. This makes no tactical sense. You could simply withdraw and call for human reinforcements. Why sacrifice yourself for people who are not your responsibility? The question hit Jake like a physical blow, not because it was wrong but because it revealed how different human thinking was from the rest of the galaxy. How could he explain that sometimes responsibility was not about orders or duty but about being able to sleep at night? General, those people are my responsibility because I have the power to save them. That is enough, but you gain nothing from this exchange. Your military record will show capture and defeat. Your career will be, and your crew will become prisoners. Where is the logic in this choice? Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Lisa had tears in her eyes but nodded when she saw him looking. Pete gave him a small salute. Danny's voice came over the com saying, "Whatever you decide, Captain, we are with you, General. Some things are more important than logic. Some things are more important than careers or records or even our own lives. Saving 3,000 innocent people is one of those things." For a long moment, Vecma said nothing. Jake could see the Vazari general struggling with concepts that had no place in his military training. Honor came from victory, not from sacrifice. Strength was proven through conquest, not through surrendering. "This is unprecedented," Vecma finally said. "I must consult with my superiors before I can respond to your proposal." "How long will that take?" Jake asked. "Several hours at minimum." Jake thought about the failing life support on New Haven. "General, with respect, those people do not have several hours. Make a decision now, as one military commander to another. You ask me to make choices that could affect galactic law for centuries to come. I ask you to make a choice that will let 3,000 people see tomorrow." The screen went dark as Vecma cut the connection. Jake stood in the sudden quiet of his bridge, knowing that he had just offered to sacrifice everything he cared about 4 people he barely knew. It was the most human thing he had ever done, and he was not sure the galaxy was ready to understand what that meant. The Liberty continued its slow approach toward the Vazari fleet, carrying with it a proposal that had never been made before in the history of galactic warfare. The news of Captain Morrison's offer spread through the galaxy faster than anyone thought possible. Within hours, every species in the Federation knew about the human captain who had volunteered to become a prisoner to save civilians he had never met. The reaction was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. On Earth, Admiral Richard Stone paced the command center of Pacific Fleet Headquarters, staring at the message that had arrived from the New Haven system. Around him, his senior officers debated options in urgent, quiet voices. None of them had training for this situation because no situation like this had ever existed. "We have 18 ships that could reach New Haven in 3 days, reported Admiral Stone's aide, Commander Gary Lee. "But if we send them in shooting, Morrison and his crew die for certain. And if we do nothing, 3,000 colonists die," Admiral Stone replied. He had served with Morrison during the Helix Collective conflicts and knew the younger officers' character. Morrison would not have made this offer lightly. Meanwhile, in the Federation capital, Chancellor Vera Mason called an emergency session of the Security Council. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall, their voices creating a buzz of confusion and debate that echoed off the crystal walls. The Centauri delegate, Ambassador Logic Prime 7, stood to address the assembly. "The human action lacks rational foundation. Military vessels exist to project power, not to sacrifice themselves for non-strategic assets." But the Zilani representative, Councillor Myra Thorne, disagreed. Her species was known for their emotional intelligence and their ability to understand the feelings of others, but humans have introduced something new to galactic warfare. They have shown that protecting life can be more important than military victory. The debate continued for hours while Jake Morrison waited in space between the Vazari fleet and New Haven colony. His ship hung motionless in the dark, weapons powered down, crew ready for whatever came next. On the Vazari flagship, General Deck faced a crisis that challenged everything he believed about war and honor. His senior officers gathered in the battle planning room, their faces showing the same confusion their commander felt. "This makes no sense according to any military doctrine we know," said Subcommander Relther, a younger officer who had studied human tactics during his training. "But that might be exactly why it could work." "Explain," Vecma ordered. "The humans do not fight the same way we do. They do not think about war the same way we do. Maybe that is why they sometimes win battles. They should lose." Vecma had fought human forces during border skirmishes years ago. He remembered their strange tactics, their willingness to take risks that seemed foolish, and their habit of doing unexpected things at crucial moments. But this was beyond unexpected. This was revolutionary. "If we accept his offer, what message does that send to the galaxy?" asked another officer. "That the Vazari Empire values life over strict military procedure," Relther replied. "That we can be flexible when the situation requires it." The debate among the Vazari officers continued while across the galaxy, other species struggled to understand what Jake Morrison's offer meant for the future of warfare. The warrior Crag Empire viewed Morrison's action as pure cowardice. Their generals issued statements calling it the worst military decision in galactic history. But younger Crag officers, those who had fought alongside humans in joint operations, began to question whether their elders truly understood what courage meant. The philosophical Etherians saw Morrison's offer as proof that consciousness was evolving in the galaxy, They published papers suggesting that the human action represented a new form of warfare based on compassion rather than conquest. The logical Andromedans ran computer simulations to determine the statistical probability of Morrison's strategy succeeding. Their calculations showed it should fail in 97% of possible outcomes, but they also noted that humans had a history of succeeding when logic said they should fail. Back at New Haven Colony, Mayor Frank Collins and his deputy Helen Brooks monitored the communications between ships while their people waited in the emergency shelters. The life support systems continued to fail, now showing less than 3 days of air remaining. "Frank, do you think Morrison's plan will work?" Helen asked as they watched the status displays show more red warning lights. "I think Jake Morrison is the kind of man who does what he thinks is right, even when everyone tells him it is impossible," Frank replied. Whether the Vazari understand that kind of thinking is another question. In the shelter's common area, families gathered around communication screens, listening to news reports from across the galaxy. Children who had been born on New Haven had never seen Earth, but they knew the stories their parents told about the homeworld where people sometimes did crazy things because they believed those things were right. Danny Rodriguez worked in the Liberty's engine room, making sure every system was perfect in case they needed to move quickly. He knew Morrison's plan was dangerous, but he also knew his captain would never abandon people who needed help. "Lisa," Jake said on the bridge. "Any word from the Vazari?" "Nothing yet, Captain, but I am reading a lot of traffic between their ships. Sounds like they are having heated discussions." Karen Walsh checked her medical supplies one more time, though she was not sure what she was preparing for. If the Vazari accepted Morrison's offer, the Liberty's crew would become prisoners. If they rejected it, the ship would probably be destroyed in the fighting that followed. "Sir," Pete Harris reported from his station, "I am picking up long sensors. Looks like human ships heading this way, but they are still days out." Jake nodded. Help was coming, but not fast enough. The decision would be made here and now, based on whether a Vazari general could understand why a human captain would sacrifice everything to save strangers. The galaxy waited while one ship hung in space between two fleets, carrying an offer that had never been made before and might never be made again. General Vecma stood alone in his private quarters aboard the Vazari flagship, staring at a holographic display that showed the tactical situation. One human ship hung motionless between his fleet and the colony, waiting for an answer to an offer that challenged 3,000 years of military tradition. The general had spent his entire life following the Korath Accords. They were not just laws to him but the foundation of civilized warfare. Yet here was a human captain proposing something the Accords had never considered, because no species had ever been willing to make such a sacrifice. A soft chime indicated an incoming message from the Vazari High Command. The hologram changed to show Supreme Commander Veltar, the highest military authority in the Empire. His ancient face was hard with disapproval. General Vecma explained this situation immediately. "Reports reaching the capital suggest you are considering accepting an unprecedented surrender offer. Supreme Commander. The human captain has offered to exchange himself and his ship for the safe evacuation of New Haven's civilians. This action falls outside all established military protocols. Then reject it and complete your mission. The mining colony violated territorial agreements. They must surrender according to proper procedure." Vecma chose his words carefully. "Supreme Commander, their life support systems are failing. If they cannot surrender properly before dying, our victory becomes meaningless. Military objectives do not change because the enemy faces internal difficulties. You have your orders." The connection ended, leaving Vecma alone with his thoughts. He was a soldier who had never disobeyed a direct command, but he was also someone who had spent decades studying warfare from every angle. What Morrison offered was not just about saving lives, it was about showing the galaxy something new. Meanwhile, on the Liberty, Jake Morrison received word that human evacuation ships were being prepared but would not arrive for 2 days. The colonists had less than 40 hours of air remaining. Time was running out for everyone. "Captain," Lisa said quietly, "the Vazari are moving. Looks like they are positioning for final attack." Jake watched the tactical display as the enemy ships adjusted formation. He had gambled everything on the hope that warrior honor would include respect for protective sacrifice. If he was wrong, the next few minutes would see the Liberty destroyed, and the colonists left to die slowly in their failing shelters. "Sir, incoming transmission from General Vecma," Pete reported. The main screen activated to show the Vazari commander. His expression was unreadable, but Jake thought he saw something different in the alien's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. Captain Morrison, I have consulted with my superiors and my senior officers. Your proposal creates legal and tactical complications that the Vazari Empire is not prepared to address. Jake felt his heart sink. He had failed. The colonists would die, his crew would die, and nothing would change. However, Detmer continued, I am authorized to make field decisions when facing unprecedented situations. Against the advice of my command structure, I choose to accept your offer. Jake stared at the screen in shock. Around him, his crew let out quiet sounds of relief and amazement. They had bet everything on the hope that alien honor might include human compassion, and somehow they had one. General, thank you. How do you want to proceed? You will surrender your ship to my custody. Immediately, your crew will be treated according to prisoner protocols. In exchange, I will allow human evacuation vessels safe passage to remove all civilians from New Haven Colony. And after the evacuation, your fate will be decided by higher authorities. But the civilians will be free to return to human space. Jake nodded. It was more than he had dared hope for. We accept your terms, General. The next few hours passed like a strange dream. Jake ordered his crew to prepare for surrender while Vazari boarding parties approached the Liberty. But instead of the hostile takeover they expected, the soldiers treated them with unusual respect. Sub-Commander Reltha led the boarding party and spoke privately with Jake as the Liberty was secured. Captain, I must ask why you made this choice. My people have studied human tactics for decades, but we have never seen anything like this. Because sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do, Jake replied. Those people down there have families, dreams, lives worth living. I could not watch them die when I had the power to save them. Even though it means your career is finished. Even though you will face military tribunals and possible imprisonment. Jake thought about the children in New Haven's shelters. About families who would see another day because of what happened here. Some things are worth more than careers. 2 days later, the human evacuation fleet arrived to find an extraordinary sight. Vazari ships were actually helping to load civilian transports, ensuring the process went smoothly and safely. General Vekema had not just honored his agreement, but had gone beyond it, providing medical assistance and supply support for the evacuation. Admiral Stone contacted Jake aboard the Vazari flagship, where he was being held in comfortable quarters that felt more like guest rooms than prison cells. Jake, the entire galaxy is talking about what you did here. Some are calling you a hero, others are calling you insane. What do you call yourself? Jake looked out the window at the evacuation ships carrying 3,000 people to safety. I call myself lucky that it worked out this way. The Federation Council wants to meet with you when this is over. They think your action might change how the galaxy approaches warfare. That was never the goal, sir. I just wanted to save those people. Sometimes the best changes happen when people are not trying to change anything. They just do what feels right. As the last evacuation ship departed New Haven, Jake Morrison sat in his temporary quarters and wondered what would happen next. He had broken every rule of military engagement, but somehow he had also opened a door to something new. Whether the galaxy would walk through that door remained to be seen. 6 months after the incident at New Haven, Jake Morrison stood before the Federation Assembly in a uniform he was not sure he still had the right to wear. The Great Hall buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages as representatives from across the galaxy debated what his actions meant for the future of warfare. The Vazari had released him, and his crew 3 weeks earlier with full military honors. An unprecedented action that had shocked both their empire and the rest of galactic society. General Vekema had personally escorted them to the Federation capital, claiming that holding such prisoners would dishonor the very sacrifice that had impressed him. Chancellor Vera Mason called the assembly to order, her voice carrying across the crystal chamber. We gather today to address the actions of Captain Morrison and their implications for galactic military law. His choice to offer protective surrender has created the first serious challenge to the Korath Accords in 3 millennia. Jake sat in the witness section beside his crew. Lisa Parker wore her dress uniform with quiet pride, while Danny Rodriguez fidgeted nervously with his sleeve. Karen Walsh and Pete Harris flanked them, all of them still amazed that they were free and alive. The Centauri delegate spoke first, his electronic voice precise and emotionless. Logic dictates that Captain Morrison's action was statistically inefficient and militarily unsound. However, logic also confirms that his method achieved objectives that conventional tactics could not. Ambassador Myra Thorne of the Zilani rose gracefully from her seat. My people have studied the emotional resonance of this event across 47 worlds. Captain Morrison's choice has inspired a fundamental shift in how species view the relationship between military power and moral responsibility, but the Crag representative disagreed forcefully. This human weakness cannot be allowed to contaminate proper warrior culture. Military strength comes from decisive action, not from surrendering to save those too weak to defend themselves. Jake listened to the debate with growing amazement. What he had seen as a simple choice between right and wrong had become a galactic philosophical crisis. Species were questioning assumptions they had held for thousands of years. General Vec requested permission to address the assembly, something unusual for a military officer in a political gathering. When granted the floor, he spoke with the careful dignity that marked all his actions. Honored delegates, I have served the Vazari Empire for 40 years, following the Korath Accords without question, but Captain Morrison showed me that perfect adherence to rules can sometimes prevent us from achieving the goals those rules were meant to serve. The Vazari general looked directly at Jake. The Accords exist to limit warfare's destruction and protect civilian populations. Captain Morrison found a way to accomplish both objectives more completely than any traditional military action could have achieved. He saved 3,000 lives without firing a shot or losing a single soldier. The debate continued for hours, but Jake's attention was drawn to a side conversation between younger delegates from various species. They were not arguing about whether his action was right or wrong, but about how to implement similar approaches in future conflicts. When Chancellor Mason finally called for his testimony, Jake stood and walked to the central podium. The great hall fell silent as hundreds of beings from across the galaxy waited to hear from the human who had changed everything. Honored delegates, I did not set out to challenge galactic law or change military doctrine. I saw people in danger and had the power to help them. The choice seemed obvious. Jake paused, looking around the assembly at faces that ranged from confusion to admiration to anger. Some of you have called my action heroic, others have called it foolish. I think it was simply human. We do not fight because we enjoy war. We fight to protect what we love. Sometimes, the best way to win is to be willing to lose everything for others. That is not weakness. That is the strongest thing any person can do. The hall erupted in discussion as delegates debated Jake's words, but one voice rose above the rest. A young Andromedan officer named Captain Ben Walsh requested recognition. Captain Morrison, your action has inspired military academies across the galaxy to develop new tactical approaches. The Andromedan Fleet Academy now teaches protective engagement protocols based on your example. How do you feel about becoming a teacher of warfare? Jake smiled at the irony. If teaching people to save lives makes me a teacher of warfare, then I accept that responsibility gladly. The assembly voted to establish the Morrison Protocols, new additions to the Korath Accords that recognize protective surrender, humanitarian ceasefire, and civilian priority engagement as legitimate military options. It was the first major change to galactic military law in over 2,000 years. As Jake left the assembly hall, he was approached by Admiral Stone, who carried new orders and a familiar smile. Captain, the Federation Council has approved construction of a new training facility. The Morrison Institute for Advanced Military Ethics will teach officers from every member species. They want you to command it. Jake looked at the orders that would make him responsible for training the next generation of galactic military leaders. It was not the career he had planned, but it felt right. What about the Liberty? She is being upgraded and will serve as the Institute's training vessel. Your crew has volunteered to stay with you, if you will have them. 6 months later, Jake stood on the bridge of the rebuilt Liberty as she approached the newly constructed Morrison Institute. Students from dozens of species filled the corridors, learning that warfare could be about more than conquest and victory. The first class to graduate under the Morrison Protocols was put to the test when war broke out between the Andromedans and the Helix Collective. Captain Ben Walsh, commanding an Andromedan vessel, found himself facing a situation where traditional tactics would result in massive civilian casualties. Instead of following conventional military doctrine, Walsh offered protective surrender to save refugee ships caught in the battle zone. His former enemies joined the evacuation effort, turning a potential massacre into the galaxy's first humanitarian rescue operation conducted by opposing military forces. Jake watched the news reports with quiet satisfaction. His crew gathered around him on the Liberty's bridge, now serving as instructors for students who came from worlds he had never seen. Captain, Lisa said with a smile, I think you started something bigger than you realized. Jake looked out at the stars that no longer seemed quite as strange or distant as they once had. Somewhere out there, military officers were learning that the strongest weapon in any arsenal was the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect others. Maybe, he replied, but all we really did was remember what it means to be human among the stars.